Hello, friends. Welcome back to the podcast. This week, our guest is Barry Dillon from Venture Out. Barry, what's the crack? How are you keeping?
Good, lads. Thanks for having me.
No, thanks for agreeing to come on. I came across Venture Out maybe 4 months ago, and since then, I've been really interested in what you guys are doing. Um, but before we get into that, could you tell us a bit about yourself, Barry?
Yeah, great to hear that we're slowly our roots are spreading a little bit, and people are starting to learn a little bit about who we are. Um, so yeah, no, my name is Barry. I'm originally from Kells in Meath and relocated over to the west of Ireland a little bit over 15 years ago, having travelled after college and getting into outdoor adventure sports. I returned to Ireland. There was a little bit of time between kind of resettling where I kind of had aspirations of maybe living abroad, but I was very connected to Ireland, very close family and friends and stuff. So I came back to Ireland and decided to, try and make a living out of outdoor facilitation and guiding, and then I kind of fell into youth work and social care. And I've married the two, I suppose, in the creation of Venture Out, which is a very quick whistle stop tour as to how I ultimately came to, help found Venture Out. But it's very much the merging of my own personal passion for outdoor activities. Um, Probably in the earlier days, more adrenaline filled adventure activities. I really enjoy kite surfing and mountaineering, and but maybe it's age, or maybe it's an appreciation of the simpler things. But just the connection with nature now, I can really see the value in that as well. So it's lovely to bring the two together. The idea of supporting people in a social care capacity, be it through youth work or family support, and then at the same time being able to deliver our programs through the outdoors and to be able to be out in nature as we deliver our practice. So that's a little bit about where I'm coming from and where we are right now.
Thanks for that, Barry. I don't know if I mentioned to you before, but I'm actually currently working as a youth worker, and I'm intrigued to hear about your experience. Was it that you were working with the young people, and that you were kind of shown very clearly that there was this lack of time in the natural world with the young people, or was it more like you said, I have this big passion, but I also care about young people. How can I bring it in?
Well, I was predominantly in the outdoor field, guiding and instructing, and it was very skills focused. People
Okay.
would I'd engage with youth groups, and my job was to teach them skills around how to become a kayaker and map reading, and it was very skills focused. But actually, what I really enjoyed was the interaction with them and the personalities, and seeing what they got out of it. It was just, for me, it was, plenty of my colleagues in the early days during our training remained in the facilitation or the guiding and the skills development piece, where for me, I maybe just got a bit more of a kick out of the impact it was having on their social and emotional skills, as opposed to just the technical aspect of it. So I
Mm,
I came from the outdoors into youth work, and when I first joined the youth work sector, I was introduced to lots of different mediums, the arts, the technology, and I went on little journeys. I did a lot of training programs with the NYCI, and linked in with different organizations to learn a little bit about STEM and how things like Coder Dojo and technology, how that could be delivered in youth work. But I obviously, my passion was outdoors, and outdoors and nature engagement, and that's where I was most comfortable. So what I started doing is delivering my practice in the outdoors, and I could see the impact it was having, and the difference it was making to some of the young people in our youth project when you brought them outdoors. Like, quite often it was just a completely different personality you'd see. They weren't bouncing off the walls. Their energy was different. They were engaged in a much different way. So It's probably where the idea of Venture Out was born, was through those early interactions in youth work and social care, where I could see, God, geez, there's a certain cohort here that need this. That when we bring them outside, they become completely different characters, and the ones that would be so difficult to manage and engage in an indoor setting became the kind of the star pupil when they were in the forest and they were swinging off a hammock, or doing a little bit of bushcraft. They were the ones who were right in the middle of it, and it's just brilliant, and we just recognized that very early on. So yeah, it was probably outdoors first, and then recognizing the value of the outdoors in youth work. It was really interesting, actually, for you contemplating where the outdoors sat in youth work maybe 15 years ago. I clearly remember an application form through a local organization who are one of our main funders at the moment. But at that time, they had an application form for small activity grants, and at the bottom it said, "We won't fund outdoor activities," because it hadn't been represented particularly well up to that point. Maybe the evaluations that were undertaken afterwards, or the analysis of the benefits that they had on the participants, just hadn't been sold to the funders. And maybe that's because there was a real focus on skills development and technical development, where in the last couple of years, I think the Irish providers have really ramped it up and started to showcase what we can do when you marry youth work delivered through the outdoors, as opposed to a youth project just visiting an adventure centre to learn a couple of kayaking skills. So I just think it's really nice to see the evolution of the funding landscape in Ireland, that funders and policymakers are getting behind it now, because there's organisations like ourselves that they're delivering this sort of stuff, but then backing it up with evidence and research and showing that this is exactly how we do it and the benefits it has.
Barry, I wanted to ask a quick question. I was wondering if you I'm sure you have suffered with the problem of kind of enticing people outside and get them to really appreciate, especially younger people, get them to appreciate what it is to be outside. Because I for one, grew up in a kind of rural area, and when I was younger, all I wanted to do was to grow up and get into the concrete jungle, for want of a better term. And I now live in Madrid, so I suppose you could say dream accomplished in that sense. Obviously, Jim over here obviously lives in Dublin, again, another big city, though obviously close to the beach and all the rest of it, but still, in the day-to-day times, it's just concrete all around. And I feel like, especially you were saying, as you've got older, you've started to appreciate more maybe the simplicity, or you don't need to do all these massive, huge events and the kite surfing and such forth. But I was wondering if you find it kind of sometimes challenging to convince sometimes young people that actually just simply going into the forest and doing things that may be deemed as more simpler, or maybe to them initially potentially boring, right, or something that's like, I could do that every day of the week, that actually that has like a benefit, and actually it's not all about moving to these big cities, and actually that it's so important for us to have that natural landscape at our doorsteps, and that where we can really access it.
I think I look, young people, a mass generalization coming in out here at the moment, but they're attracted to something new and exciting, and it captures their attention, and it's filled with energy and possibly fueled by adrenaline. And for younger lads, maybe it needs to have elements of risk, and for maybe some of the older cohorts, the young adults, they learn through elements of stress and fear. So we have to design programs for that young age group that you're talking about, which is exciting. And we found that if we bring a group into a forest and we deliver a forest bathing activity, there's a fairly good chance they won't engage with the idea of going straight in and practicing mindful walking, or practicing a sit spot and connecting with your senses. But if you deliver, if you front load it with exciting, somewhat risky activities, then you have their attention. And then they're more inclined to kind of buy into what you're selling, which is let's talk about the health benefits of just taking a walk in nature. And instead of going to the gym on the treadmill, do your jog in the local woodland or the forest. And so I think we have to be honest as well that young people are going to be attracted by certain elements that our programs need to have. And I think that's what's driven us in a lot of ways to design programs for young men. We have a schools program at the moment called our Two Wolves schools program, and it's funded through the Irish Youth Foundation and VHI. But we go into second level schools, and we work with fourth, fifth, and sixth years men, and it's around healthy masculinity. But we bring them outdoors, we light a fire, we hand them all a knife, we do some whittling with hazel, and straight away you have them. They're just, wow, this is different. We're not in school, you know. These lads trusted us to light a fire, and they've given us a knife. So it's almost like, what do you want to talk about, lads? You have us, you know. And then once they're out there, some of the conversations that emerge and some of the topics you explore and you discuss, it's what you'd hope it would be, but I don't know if it would be there without the fire lighting and the kind of the risky behaviour of whittling or doing bushcraft activities. So I think for young people, there's probably a view of some of the simpler nature engagement activities, no different to when I was younger, that, you know, I'll get to those when I'm a bit older, but they do want the bright lights and, as you said, the concrete jungle, and they're attracted to that type of stuff. So I suppose we need to come up with creative ideas as to how we can sell it to them. For the expedition programs that we run at the moment, so we deliver some wilderness-based extended wilderness expeditions, usually anywhere between 4 to 7 days. And what we found is that young men between 18 and 24 who are engaged with probation, drug and alcohol services, coming out of treatment, those linked with mental health services, they're really up for trying what we're selling, which is, come away with us. We're going to go camping for 5 days. We're going into the mountains. We're going to be doing all these kind of risky, challenging activities. And that's what they buy into. And then next thing, they find themselves 3 days into a really intense personal development program where you're talking about emotions and relationships and feelings, and they completely buy into it. But I don't know if you'd get them to buy into it if it was in a local resource centre in a counselling room. So I think there's something there around the creative nature of how you design a program which is attractive to that cohort.
And Barry, we've had guests on. We spoke about druidry, about earthing. So we've kind of got all different like perspectives on the outside connection, on what it is to connect with the earth. But I wonder, you talk about that buy-in that you get, right, from these people who kind of, they probably didn't think that they were gonna buy into it in that way. They probably, like you said, they're kind of in for it for the adventure, and then, like you said, 3 days in, they're talking about their personal development and such forth. Just from your own experience, from someone who's been out in the wild, so to speak, for probably a lot more than the vast majority of us have, what is it that you think the outside world, why does it help facilitate those types of conversations and help facilitate that kind of opening between potential strangers that, like you say, and I fully agree with you, that maybe with sat in a kind of a room, you know, with your four walls, it's a lot, if not impossible, a lot harder anyway to come by that opening and that kind of almost trust that kind of comes with being in with the outside. What is it from your experience, do you think, that facilitates that?
Like there's so many research papers at the moment trying to figure out they call it the black box of adventure therapy, where they're like, we know there's all these variables in there, but we can't just put our finger on what is the one big driving force. Like, what's you've got your theory of change, which is you bring a group into the outdoors, you deliver a personal development experience, you challenge them, and you surround them in a safe environment of participants who are supportive and positive. The facilitator and the guide is co-adventuring, so you're not a kind of an expert or a distant figure. You're actually on they can see you getting wet and sleeping on rough ground and eating the same food out of the trangia. So there's all these variables, and I think different things mean different things to different people as to what it is that creates the change. But broadly speaking, I think there's an informality about it. Like I was at an event yesterday and I found myself, we were just about to be brought up onto stage to speak to, I'm not sure if you know Rory from Rory Stories. He was doing an event for Recovery Week, and we were brought up, and quite nervous just before we went up on stage. And I said to my colleague, I said, I'm a bit nervous, but guarantee if it was outdoors and it was in the kind of surrounded by mountains, we don't have that same, I don't know, there's not that same structural societal boundaries or something. So I think there's an informality about going into the outdoors. There's a freedom. So if you facilitate one of these workshops in an outdoor space, you're surrounded by nature, you're surrounded by, movement all the time, and be it the wind or the weather conditions or the trees or just the scale of the mountains in the background. So there's something there around the informality, the freedom, and the openness of the environment, which just lends itself really nice to creating that space. I think for us, if I was just to focus on the wilderness expeditions, I think there's something there around when you're in nature, you really strip things back. So you don't have a big trailer full of stuff with you. It's just you and your backpack and the lads with you, and you're walking on a journey. And, usually the phone isn't out. There's no connection, or there's no reception, or people don't have batteries. And it's very much you're there together in that moment. You've also made a commitment to be there. And we just find that just, again, it just means that people are in a different headspace when they're with you. It just creates an opportunity for people to be in a different headspace, I suppose, is probably the best way to describe it. So yeah, no, look, that I've gone off on a real kind of circular tangent there, telling you all about the different variables that are linked to adventure therapy. But some of the simpler programs we run, I think there's elements of movement in all the programs we deliver. So you kind of have to walk to get to the spaces. It seems quite simple, but the idea of movement just releases different chemicals in your body, and it just makes you feel and think differently. So some of the one-to-one stuff that we do with young kids in care, we won't do too much chatting at the start. We'll just get them moving, and there'll be a lot of shoulder to shoulder walking and talking, and the talk that comes out is like you would not get that in a youth project, in a counselling room, in a coffee shop. But when you're out and you're surrounded by nature and the elements, and you're moving and there's physical activity involved, I just think it's a different perspective people take on, and a different mind frame entirely. I think nature plays a massive part in that, but I'm only really touching on that.
When I was hearing you speak, Barry, what came to mind is I've heard several people talk about this like fine line between order and chaos that we all need. And it feels very apt right now, where you're in the wilderness, right? There's potential chaos, right? And it's taking time to get there, and it's not as safe as young people usually are, as in four walls. If you fall, you can do this. If you can do, there's a bit of like, oh, we have to play by some thin line here. We have to follow certain rules because it's very important to our well-being. But there's still that safety that they know that Barry or the other co-facilitator has them if there's any real danger. What do you think about that?
We have look, I a couple of years ago there was a guy teaching us remote emergency care, and he had a great expression, which is like, you want everyone you bring out to be having an adventure. He says, as soon as you start having an adventure, you're in trouble. So there is that element that we always want them to believe that we're doing this too, we're like, this is the first time we've been here, and the weather could turn at any minute. And I think that does lend an element of excitement to the process. It's just different. And for a lot of participants who engage in our programs, be it on a one-to-one level or group level, this is different for them. They've never done stuff like this. So there's just a level of excitement and uncertainty. When you're out in nature, you don't know what the weather's going to do next. If the sun is shining, you're like, this is great. And you're like, but you never know, you got your kind of, anything could happen, and people are kind of minding their step. And if you're delivering any type of a risky activity, that gets people's their attention kind of up, and they're a little bit more energized by that idea. So I do agree. Yeah, there's an element of uncertainty for sure, which you don't get in an indoor setting, and that's physiologically, that's got to do something different to your brain, to your head. So yeah, I think that's a nice. I hadn't fully kind of put my finger on that one before, but you're dead right.
But like you said, it's like this massive box, and does everyone has their own hot take maybe about what works for them and what could potentially be working. Barry, one thing that I want to ask you is that too often when you talk around mental health, there's very often heavy and sad stories. And I was wondering, I'm sure you've seen your fair share of kind of uplifting turns. And obviously, I don't want you to give any specific details, but it would be great if you could kind of give some listeners who maybe are interested in maybe getting their son involved or their daughter involved or even themselves involved, if you could talk about kind of a process for one or the two of the people that you've been working with.
Yeah, I think at the moment, I mean, the first thing I'd say is for anyone listening who does have someone in mind who you think like outdoor therapeutic activities would be of benefit to them. There's lots of organisations emerging. It's a really interesting space in Ireland at the moment. So I'd say, get online and find out who your local, who the most local organisation. There's a great crowd down in the southeast called Active Connections. They also operate up around Dublin and Cork, Kerry. You've New Wave Adventure Project down kind of in Kerry and Limerick, work up Mayo, Galway, Connacht region. So and then that's just the kind of land-based organisations. You've Liquid Therapy up in Donegal that do surf therapy, and Surf to Heal down in Cork who do surf therapy as well. And you've Sailing to Wellness who do this type of work out in boats, and Mehel Mara who do it on Curragh. So what I suggest is go find the local organisation to you. And most of us, it's such a niche type of intervention and service that we offer that not many of the organisations have tried to go national, because it's such a specific skill set that we're all operating within our own jurisdiction, if you like. The second thing I'd say is, it's probably it's you could argue it's for everyone, but I still think it has to be for the right person at the right time. I've mentioned a few of the cohorts that this works really well for: young men who are traditionally resistant to talk therapy, getting them outdoors and doing stuff, and seeing if the wall, if you can get behind a curtain or get behind a wall a little bit. So really giving it a bit of thought: is this the right intervention for the person I have in mind? And do they like elements of the outdoors anyway, naturally? And are they up? Are there elements of their personality that's drawn to challenge and risk and danger? And maybe this is the kind of the key, the way in, that they haven't met counsellors that have done it for them, or they haven't been able to build a relationship in that manner. But going out with an adventure therapist, you might find that they it's the activity is what draws them in, and before they know it, they're actually talking and they're getting the help that they need. But it's the activity really that got them there in the first place. Like some of the stories, I mean, they're very much based around that idea of working with people who, until they kind of came away with us or linked in with our services, they would have spoken about not being able to find something that would help them. Maybe they weren't able to link with a counsellor or a therapist purely because the setting that they were in, they didn't like making eye contact. They felt uncomfortable in a one-to-one scenario in a room, but they came out and, before they knew it, they were engaging in an activity. They were shoulder to shoulder with a guide, and they found that a lot more, a lot more receptive to the way they are and the way that they like to communicate. So we've had loads of participants that have reported, that we've done this type of stuff before, and none of it's had any impact. But out here, it's different. And I remember one guy in particular on an expedition saying exactly that he'd come through treatment and he hadn't really enjoyed the process. But when he was out surrounded by the hills, we were delivering something very similar, a workshop on effective behaviours, I think. And he was like, I've done all of this, but it's just hitting a different chord right now because I'm here. And it just feels like I'm having completely different thoughts, or I'm thinking a little bit more deeply on it. So those type of stories wouldn't be uncommon that for people who have, the same information that they would have had in the past, but it's just landing differently. But yeah, I think recognizing the fit. When you think of therapy and counseling, it's around what is the right intervention for that person at that time with which therapist or counselor, and yeah, it's not for everyone. I would say that it's really important that whatever we design for an individual is pitched at the right level. So you don't want to set somebody up to fail. You don't want to put a challenge in front of them that they can't overcome. If you put a challenge in front of them where it's not a challenge, well, then they're not going to learn anything from it either. So it's a really fine line, and you need to balance that piece quite well. So it'd be interesting to see in the next couple of years which organisations emerge in this area, and hopefully there'll be a little bit of uniformity around the qualifications, because I see that as being a potential pitfall for adventure therapy as a whole. If people are practicing it without the kind of the skills to recognise what is the right level of challenge and what is the right activities I should be bringing these people on.
Barry, I just wanted to just jump in. I'm just wary of the fact that, and I feel like with adventure therapy, and maybe this is my own bias talking, but we've spoken a lot about lads, how they can kind of, you give them the knife and the fire, and they're like, oh, and the adventure that these boys need kind of to get them talking. And some people may pigeonhole adventure therapy specifically for blokes, basically. Oh, so wilderness, automatically the imagery is like of this Neanderthal out there in the wilderness, whatever else. But I wonder if you could talk to us a bit about, not necessarily stories, but just how as well it hits girls or kind of young women as well differently, and how maybe, like you're saying, how you have to kind of tailor certain things for certain people, obviously. And obviously, of course, we're all different here, but how also that adventure therapy is also very much a thing for women and girls as well. It's not like, because I feel like there's a lot of thing whereby they might almost feel intimidated. Oh, it's a blokey thing with the knives and the fire. Okay, cool. I'll stick to my four walls here. Whereas actually, they could almost, in a way, benefit potentially even more so because it's something maybe that they're not allowed to do or open to do or whatever, because of the kind of stereotypes that we kind of put these people in.
Yeah, like if we were to break down the genders we've engaged numbers wise, it's probably 80 to 90% young men, and somewhere between 10 to 20% young women who've engaged in the expeditions, the one-to-one supports that we offer. And for some of the older, some of the groups where we have older participants, we do a little bit of work with Mental Health Ireland. There's an initiative called Woodlands for Wellness, and we get quite a few females on that one. But that's a little bit more slow paced, and there's less emphasis on the adventure adrenaline side of it. So it's just the nature of the way our organization has evolved. The funding that was available, I suppose, and the need that we identified, which was very much, services saying to us, we just have all these, young men who won't talk to a counsellor, who won't engage in these groups that we're offering. And the females that they had on the books were more receptive. They were able to talk in a traditional setting, and they were interested, or they were available to join interest and hobby groups, and they recognize the benefits of it. And look, that's an age old issue, I suppose, that men find it a little bit more difficult to engage in those type of activities. So for the females that we have engaged, it's just ever so slightly different activities for some. And again, it is about tapping into what their interests are. So I suppose I'm just thinking of some of the female guys that deliver the one-to-one stuff. They like to engage more in nature arts based type of projects, practicing mindfulness, using hammocks, gentle walks, more kind of nature engagement. So if you can imagine, I'm giving you kind of stereotypical kind of examples here. There'll be anomalies there where we've had loads of females who come on the expeditions with us, and they love all the adrenaline side of things and the adventure side of things. But I think there's activities there, and there's different approaches to suit whoever you have in front of you. We started bringing in stand-up paddleboarding in the last year, and again, it's just this really gentle activity. You feel like you're you're embarking on an adventure, but it lacks the kind of big wave surfing and the possibility of getting yourself injured, and you don't need a huge level of skill. So that was a lovely activity that we just felt, didn't matter whether you were male, female, whether you were drawn to the adventure challenge side of things. It was just an activity that everybody could engage with. So I think it's just the way we've evolved as an organization, that we're predominantly working with men, but like it translates equally well. And then sometimes as well, I think for some of the girls who might have been referred to us, or some of the young women, the idea of the number of kind of participants or potential participants that the wilderness expeditions would be pitched towards would probably be similar, male and female. But it's the males who are coming forward saying, yes, I like the sound of that, I want to try it. But we've had loads of feedback from let's say the probation services, for instance. They would have said, look, we've loads of girls, but they don't want to go camping. Can you do this as a residential in a hostel and do all the other activities, but just don't have the overnight camping in the mountains where there's no access to toilets. Hygiene is an issue for a lot of people who wouldn't be used to being in the mountains. So that's completely understandable, and I think that does kind of maybe answer partly why we have mostly men coming on the expeditions. But certainly the one-to-one stuff that we deliver, the young lads just seem to be more attracted. Yeah, they put their hands up and say, I'll give that a shot. And there seem to be other services and interventions for women that just, it's not as, we're not getting as many of that cohort interested. Does that answer your question, Seb? I'm not sure. Again, it's
Yeah, no, absolutely does. Like Jim and I always say, the more the guest talks and the less we do, the better the podcast will be. So don't worry about going off on tangents and answering the question 3 different million ways. We're more than happy to sit here and listen. And yeah, it does. Yeah, it makes complete sense. And like you say, the precautions, for example, about the hygiene and such, like, yeah, lads, it's easy to kind of for 4 or 5 days, not have a shower, whatever it is, what it is. Whereas obviously, the women have to have certain different precautions, and maybe even like the safety element as well kind of comes into things. Where being in a tent where maybe anyone can come in and whatever the case. Whereas rather than being a hostel, having that security is also another thing that factors in, right? But yeah, it makes complete sense. But hopefully, I think hopefully more and more women can get onto it, because I'm sure, like you say, there's so many different aspects to it. It's not all just mad jumping off cliffs and all the rest of it. That I'm sure that that they could also benefit of it hugely. So hopefully, here's to hoping.
It's really interesting as well that, like, when you mix the genders on these expeditions, that it hugely adds to the process. We see it, like we see the lads taking on so much more. It's just the female input to the group discussions. So we really encourage it. If we've got 7 lads and 3 girls on an expedition, which would probably be the norm, it's completely different than having just a group of 10 lads. It's just slightly now, not hugely different, but they just see things slightly differently quite often. They add like a softer touch to the conversation. They bring in aspects that maybe we as facilitators and the participants certainly hadn't thought of. And yeah, but again, like I'm really cognizant not to generalize the genders, because we get all types of people on the programs as well.
And I'm really glad you said that, because I mean, what I've benefited from that myself, in the sense of I have a lot of girlfriends, that I talk to, and because I enjoy female company, because it brings out, like you said, different type of conversation. Jim and I, when we kind of first connected, I think one of the things that we kind of both found, while I talked about myself, was that I was having conversations with Jim that maybe I was more used to having with a girl, just in the sense of the sensitivity about certain subjects, right? Because with blokes, there's always, to some extent, it feels like there's always some wall, like you say, some iron curtain that we're not really pulling back the whole way, right? And having that kind of female energy, it does change things. And I personally have benefited from it hugely in my own life. And it's something that when you hear kind of a lot of lads that they don't have that kind of, maybe they might have a girlfriend, maybe, but other than that, maybe they might not have a lot of female kind of interaction, right? And I always find it really sad when I've got a lot of friends who say, "Oh, and I haven't got any like friends that are girls. Like all my mates are just all the lads." It's like, oh man, like just from me, I'm like, oh, you're missing out so much, honestly, because it brings out a different side to you. There's conversations that I have with my girlfriends that in a minute, I just know it's not possible with the lads. It's just a thing. I mean, she's like, listen, it's is what it is.
You're missing out on a completely different
100%,
perspective.
100%.
So, but it's saying that I'd like to think that we deliver activities to whoever's in front of us. So we don't have a playbook for female, forest activities, and like it's just, this is what this person is into. They enjoy the less kind of adrenaline energy filled activities, and that's what we're going to deliver. So there's plenty of lads as well who come through the various programs we deliver, and we're like, you know what, they just wanted to chill out in the hammock, drink a hot chocolate, put the Kelly kettle on and have a chat. And so yeah, again, I was just touching on that idea of making generalizations around. And so yeah, but yeah, I think your original question was, does it change slightly depending on the gender? And absolutely, like there's generalizations you can make, but it's certainly not the rule.
Yeah. And I just wanted to ask quickly, we talk about how nature affects us, and I think a lot of us who kind of, even if it's just you get to your local park, if that's what it is, we all kind of feel that intrinsic benefit when we come back home, wherever it may be. We had a guest on a while back, Meg Ulmer, and she kind of delved into the connection that the human spirit has with animals, right? And how, people have dogs, for example, or any type of pet, to be quite honest. They'll talk to you about how they can't, like you were saying before about the black box, right? You can't necessarily say exactly what it is about your pet that makes you feel better, or why it's different to human energy. But for whatever reason, there is that connection between human and animals that, again, facilitates a different opening, a different connection. And I was wondering, obviously, I know, Ireland's not famed for its exotic animals, but whilst you're out in the wilderness, is there kind of any cognizant interaction, or like, even if it's just like, oh, here's these birds, and you're kind of recognizing certain bird sounds or whatever it may be, where people might kind of just not even, that doesn't even enter their brain until you kind of like point it out to them, or whatever it may be. Is that a part of the system?
Yeah, I think that idea of stripping everything back is a really important element of bringing people out there. So whether it's animals or whether it's plants or something scenic, like you'd stop with a group and someone would point something out, and you could end up sitting down for 5 minutes as a group and you're looking at a waterfall or something, and there's something other, like you wouldn't take that time. It's a slow pace. While we have somewhere to get to, we're not in a rush to do it. If there are like loads of sheep around Connemara where we are, like, they're always a point of fascination for people who live in the cities. And there's not a huge amount of wildlife now in Connemara. We don't have like falcons and eagles and lots of bird life and stuff like that. But I think we are surrounded by these massive mountains in the 12 Bends and the Mam Turks and the Mam Trasna mountain range. And there's something just bigger than us represented in those mountains when you're out there. So it's a combination of stripping it all back to you just have your food, you're sleeping in a sleep mag in a tent, you're walking this trail with a group of people, and you're surrounded by a constant reminder that you're just this small cog, and your worries are actually, while they're big in your head, if you get them out of your head, there's not much to it, and that's not downplaying people's problems, but I think what we've had is people come out with us and just talk about their stress levels and their anxiety levels. Once they're out and they step off the bus and they start walking, they're like, I just feel like I'm carrying the most weight I have carried in my life in this bag, but I feel like I have a weight off my shoulders metaphorically, which is, there's an irony in that, but so when you talk about the connection to nature, I think the wilderness piece is very much that, just the vastness of the scenery and the fact you don't see cars and trucks and people and phones and technology, and it really just puts people's mind and their head in a different place. And I think it's back to the basics, maybe somewhat appreciating the basics of what we need to survive, where the source of some of our issues have come from, and the vastness of what we're surrounded by. It just puts things in perspective, I think.
Barry, I'm reminded of, I had this special camping trip last September in Scotland, and it was 5 days, and we agreed to get rid of watches and phones. So we actually had no idea of the time for 5 days. So we just knew when it was bright and it was getting dark, and it was bright getting dark. And it was just this amazing, it was almost like you don't realize you've been confined by the clock. And then when you get released from the clock, you're just like, wow, this is amazing. And there was like a joke between us, like second or third day, you're like, oh, what time is it? It doesn't matter what time it is. It's just like, you're here. And I was just
Reminds me
reminded
of years ago in traveling in India, and someone came onto the beach and said, lads, does anybody know what day it is? And there must have been 5 people there who's just like, having a clue. But on our expeditions, we divvy out roles, and one of the roles each day to give participants ownership over the process is the role of timekeeper. So usually what happens is people will agree not to use their phone for the 5 days, but there are some who just like, no, I just need it. And we conveniently pick locations where there's no reception anyway, so the phone is working so hard the battery usually dies after about 6 hours anyway. But that would have been their sole source of reading the time, which is their phone. So very few people actually wear watches, which is my realization over the last couple of years delivering the expeditions. So one person gets like the famous Casio watch to wear, and whenever anybody wants to know the time, they ask them. And then what you find actually as the days go on, people are asking less and less, and every now and again the timekeeper's job is to mark, right guys, lunch is at this time and we're going to check in at this time. And again, it's just one less problem that they need to worry about. But as you said, there's something lovely about, it's just, we're just doing this journey. It doesn't actually matter when it gets dark. It'll get dark. When it's time to get up, we'll get up. And but fair play to you. Did you have a flight to catch?
No, we agreed that we would leave in the morning time on the 5th day. So we were all I think we had nowhere to be that day really. We just had to leave the mountain range. That was fun.
That's great. We did one expedition. We were funded there this year through Coca-Cola, which is lovely. They had an initiative called the Thank You Fund, and they wanted us to bring out a group of young adults who weren't in full-time education, training and employment. So it was an 18 to 24, 25-year-old cohort, which, while we always have that age group on our expeditions, it's unusual to have a full group. just that age group. We'd normally have a couple of 40-year-olds in there who are coming from treatment, and which is nice because there's a real mix of kind of life experience and they can share and stuff. But this particular expedition, there were 12, 22, 23-year-olds, and at the end of the expedition, the feedback was how they realized how little, how present they hadn't been. I don't know how I'm wording that. How mindful they were during the week with us, and how present they were in each other's company, but they hadn't ever experienced that because they had always had their phone in their hand, checking facts and adding to the conversation, where actually for the few days they were with us, they just were in each other's company, not distracted, not trying to look something up to add to the. It was just a really interesting feedback, and they all agreed. They were all like, "Yeah, I don't know how I'm gonna incorporate this back into my life when I go back." I just thought it was fascinating, you know, that age group.
I'll jump in here because it's actually interesting you bring that in, because I was having thinking about today, and I was gonna. Well, we were catching up just before the podcast, Jim and I was going to give him kudos. Maybe incorrectly, I can't remember if it was Jim who gave me this piece of wisdom, but it normally is. But I remember someone was telling me about kind of how we've got rid of boredom, right, in society, and I say that in a good way, even though obviously we always say boredom in a bad way, right? But when you're in nature, the way that I'm using boredom here is that in the sense of how you're not disturbed by anything, right? So you have this quote unquote a sense of boredom. Your mind can just run free, and it can be occupied by what's out there, right? And I normally, what do we do? When you're on the bus on the way to work or school or whatever it is, you put your headphones on, your music, and then you listen to the music and whatever. And just I swear to God, today I thought, you know what? I'm just gonna not put. I was running through my bag. I was about to put my headphones on, and I thought, nah, I'll just won't put my headphones on a 45-minute bus back home from work, and I was just looking out the window. I was just looking at the people coming onto the bus, just noticing their interactions. There was a woman behind me just talking, telling a whole life story, which obviously if I had my, and all these things, I would have never have noticed all these things on the same bus journey that I take a million times in a year. And I think how you're saying, how can we replicate that? I think in our normal kind of day-to-day life, I think in a way, reintroducing boredom, and I use that in the positive sense of the word, if that is possible, reintroducing boredom into our lives, into our daily lives, getting rid of these constant distractions. The phone. I noticed 2 or 3 times, I, without even thinking, just instinctively unlocked my phone. I didn't even think about the passcode. I unlocked my phone, Twitter straight away. My thumb just did it naturally, and I had to cognitively go, no, put that down. You're trying to actively be bored on this journey home, right? And I think that's what nature does. Like you're saying, that it kills the phone because the battery runs out eventually. Sooner or later, it will run out. You've got no phone there. There's no Twitter to log into. There's no music as a result, and so on and so forth. And then you're just forced to take in what your surroundings are offering. And we can do that in a cityscape. It's not forced upon us. So we have to be the protagonist in that action, rather than in nature. Nature goes, listen, lad, sit down because I'm going to be the protagonist. I'll make you listen to me. Whereas when it's in the cityscape, it's like the other way around. We have to, and that's obviously harder, right, to take the responsibility. And obviously, I'm not going to say I'm going to do this every single bus journey, but it was interesting just the differences that I noticed. And I remember thinking, oh man, I'm sure it was Jim that told me about it. And so when you brought it up, I was like, I think that's a way that we could kind of reintroduce that kind of being present and like, how am I feeling on this bus journey? Why is, when that woman talking, what does that kind of stir in me? Am I getting annoyed? Why am I getting annoyed? When I see this, I saw this young couple, and they were, I don't know, 20. And it just kind of reminded me of me and my girlfriend when we were 20. And I would have never even looked at them if I was in my phone. I would have just been there with my headphones, being like, oh, when am I getting home, right? And all these little things, I was like, yeah, man. And so when you brought that up, I just thought I had to kind of butt in and put in my 2 pence worth.
There's lots of research in this area. If you go down that rabbit hole around, the benefits of spending time in nature for attention, for attention span, for emotional regulation, for stress levels. They've actually empirically tested through, heart rate, blood pressure, all that sort of stuff. And so they've described just looking at nature as a soft fascinator. So you see people get up to the top of a mountain and they just sit there and they just look at the vista for 10 minutes, 20 minutes. There mightn't be anything there other than just the vastness of what it is that they're looking at. And they reckon that does the exact opposite to whatever's going on in your brain physiologically, the exact opposite to looking at a screen or to being engaged in something technology linked. Or so the idea, just if people during their lunch break, if they're working in an office, to go to the local park and don't go on their phone and just sit there 20 minutes. Go into the forest, and if you can buy a €15 hammock from Aldi and chill out and look at the canopy from upside down for 10 or 15 minutes, you go back to work as a completely different mind frame, completely different perspective, much fresher, rejuvenated, energized. So I think people know this naturally, but the temptation to take your phone out, if it's just there with everything you need, your music, your podcasts, your updated news, if you're into sports, you fill your glass with like every type of update all week long. But so it's almost easier to keep doing that. It's the hard thing now is to go and sit in a park bench for 15 minutes and take all that in. But actually the flip side of that is you come back much more energized with like better attention
more
span, all those
aware.
things. Much more aware and more grounded. Simple things like that, I think, is huge. So yeah, you can kind of put the phone in your pocket for a little while. It goes hand in hand, I think, with what we do. We don't make a big deal of it at this point. It just goes hand in hand. I think what is lovely, I mean, on the phone, just one last thing on the phone. We do a project with a local school. It's like a DESH school. If you're not familiar with the DESH schools, it's like they're funded through the government. They're in disadvantaged areas. So we were funded by our local sports council to go in and work with a couple of students that were having school attendance issues. And for an hour and a half, we bring them into the woods and they don't even look at their phone. And the teachers are like, we can't get them off the phone in the classroom. They will not listen to, they'll be on their phone. We have to confiscate the phone. They come out with us and they sit around the fire and we give them a little bushcraft knife to do some whittling, or they sit in their hammocks but there's no phones. So it's giving them something different, something more attractive, or something which they're interested in that isn't the phone. It's a hard one,
It's so hard. They unfortunately they run our lives, and there's this thirst to be first, right? It's like, someone's been sacked, the manager of Man United's been sacked. I need to know about it first. Well, actually, it doesn't make any difference if you found out the minute you get sacked or when you get home and you put the news on. He's still sacked either way. It hasn't changed your days. You know what I mean? But there is this thirst, and like you say, it makes you so much more aware. And if you can kind of just take that step back and kind of just watch what's going around you. There's, in Spain, you always see the typical kind of like granddad who just sits on a bench in center of Madrid, and I swear they're there the whole day, and they just don't move, and they're just people watching. That's all they're doing. They're just watching the world go by. And I think there's a certain like beauty to that maybe we could kind of all learn from. And obviously, listen, I think it's obviously better and more kind of intrinsic if you can do that in nature. But for the people who maybe find it harder to get out there, especially say on the Monday to Friday when you kind of got your daily routines, you can still like see beauty and see kind of like connections, like human connections that you wouldn't even pay attention to, that kind of can also fill you up with all that good energy, right? But yes, it's a lot harder in the cityscape than it is definitely in nature, for sure.
You can have another podcast just about phones, really. It's such a wormhole to get into.
Well, we might have to do that, Barry.
The next one.
Just before you go, Barry, I have two more quick ones. One is, you mentioned earlier that up until very recently, there was kind of a gap in the demonstrable research around the benefits of spending time in nature, particularly in regards to youth work. And I was just interested to know then, what have you guys shown? Like, what have you guys found? Like, and how did you measure it?
So the research field at the moment is there's loads of research, loads of modern contemporary research to show the benefits of spending time in nature and the link between nature and our health and well-being. That's now proven and it's there. And I suppose almost to the point where I'm sure researchers have moved on now, but that would have been the last 10 or 15 years. It would have been really big area of study. The field of adventure therapy continues to, and it's probably still somewhat vague because the theory of change varies from program to program, and there's so many really kind of strong variables linked to different people's practice that it's not just one area that people can point to say, well, if we do this, this is what's going to happen, and that's the reason it happens. So I think what's happening in the field of research for adventure therapy is there's just lots more bits and pieces coming in that add to a bigger picture to say this actually works. For us, I mean, we're seeing it all on the ground. We're seeing it happen. Like, we're seeing how for the right individual, this type of intervention is exactly what they need. The types of cohorts that I described earlier, when they engage with this type of approach, they open up and they start talking where they wouldn't have had in the past. And why that is, it varies from one individual to the other. I think a big part of it is like any support service. I think it's down to people a lot of the time who's actually delivering it. So the relationship that the participant has with the guide is massively important. And maybe in the past, there's this kind of search for the holy grail. What is it about adventure therapy that works? Can we just put our finger on it? I think what we're probably coming to a realization that adventure therapy just works like other forms of therapy. But does it work? It doesn't work for everybody. It needs to be for the right person at the right time, and it'll work. So it's not the type of intervention that just gets rolled out widely and like everyone needs to do this. It's more, well, look, this is exactly the type of therapy you need right now, and someone else might need something to do with art therapy or dance therapy, or for kids maybe it's type of play therapy. And so I think what I'm learning is that some people come through our programs and they just thrive and excel, and it's exactly what they needed. And then others try it, and it mightn't be what's the big change for them, or it mightn't be just at the right time. But I'm less focused now on the variables of adventure therapy and the type of work that we deliver, and much more on, where is this person at this moment? And a little bit like Seb was asking, do we vary the types of activities for girls and, males and females? I think the needs assessment that we do at the start, if we can be really kind of in tune with what they need, then we can offer them something that will help them at that particular time, rather than just rolling out the same program for every participant that comes through the door. So hopefully the research field will get to a point where there's less focus on, can we just find the nugget that will kind of open the key, or open the key that'll open the door that will explain why adventure therapy works. And once we can demonstrate that, then the funders will roll in behind it. It's more like, let's get to a point where it's accepted that it does work, and it's around identifying the people who need it at that particular time.
Beautiful. Thanks, Barry. Seb, do you have a question? I just have one to close. No, you're good. Barry, before we let you go, interesting question. What lesson is life teaching you right now?
It's a good question. I've two young kids. I'm really starting to recognize the value of really small actions, and a really well shaped long term goal, and how the seeds that you plant, you know, that the small steps that you take in the right direction, they all add up as time goes on, and to be patient with that. So so hard work and perseverance and all those kind of buzzwords around, you know, building something and creating a strong foundation. That it's amazing how long it takes, but it's amazing how quick you see the results. So for anyone listening, I just say, you know, figure out what direction you want to go and start putting the hard work in. And every little step you take towards it, quite often we don't stop and look back to see how far we've gone. That actually we're so focused on how far we have to go that, you know, these little steps, if you take time out to look back and realize, geez, I've all those little steps I took, you know, they add up. And probably didn't appreciate that when I was younger, you know, that actually perseverance and patience, they go kind of hand in hand. So yeah, keep moving in that direction, and don't worry if the steps are small.
Love that.
One thing
Thanks,
I'll say, lads, I don't know when this gets aired, but we're having a really the field of adventure therapy, or we call it like outdoor education and adventure therapy. The field is quite an exciting space at the moment, as I said. So we've come together with 9 other organizations across the country, and we've created what we call the Outdoor Therapeutic Activity Providers Network. It's a bit of a mouthful. Outdoor Therapeutic Activity Providers Network. And it brings together all those organizations I mentioned earlier, you know, the Active Connections, the New Waves, Salient Wellness, Liquid Therapy, Coomera Wilderness. I probably left out a couple there. On the 10th of November this year up in Castlebar, we're having a big conference. We have some international guest speakers coming in who'd be really well known. And it's just going to be for anyone who's interested in this field, who want to learn a little bit more, meet some of the organizations who are practicing on the ground. It's a free event. It's up in the college in ATU. They have the masters at the moment in outdoor education, which also has elements of adventure therapy. So it's just really nice to see the industry, if you like, coming together collectively. So I'd recommend anyone who's listening to go on to Eventbrite. You can pick up your tickets. It's all, as I said, it's free, but it's limited capacity. And yeah, you get to meet us, ask questions, learn a little bit more about our practice, how you can get involved, what training you need to work in this industry. And in the run up to November 10th, there's going to be a free online talk each Thursday for 5 weeks. So we have the likes of Ben Knowles, who's like a leading adventure therapist from Australia, and we've leading practitioners from the US, the UK. They're coming on, they're giving free talks each evening for 5 Thursdays in a run up to November 10th. All completely free. You just book your tickets through Eventbrite. And yeah, hopefully we can just spread the word around this approach and get more buy-in, and for people to understand the value of it, and just to get as many people accessing it as possible.
Thanks for that, Barry. Absolutely. We'll share the link to Venture Out and the Eventbrite links in the show description.
Thanks, lads. That was great.
Thank you very much, Barry. Thank you for your time.